What's good, my guns and butter family? Welcome back to the dinner table. I hope everybody's week has been as smooth as mine. And I'm not gonna put too much on y'all in this week's intro, but I do want to say when it comes to folks these days, whether they're close friends, family members, loved ones, relatives, whoever, you just never know if their intentions for you are pure. But when it comes to your children, your babies, you really gotta watch the type of company you keep.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
This week at the dinner table, I'll be telling y'all about the murder of 10-year-old Breasia Terrell. And since this case does involve the violence to a child, listeners' discretion is advised. Breasia Terrell was born December 4th, 2009 in Davenport, Iowa, to her mother Asia Langford. And being that she was only 10 years old, there's not a whole lot of background information on her, but I will read a little excerpt from her obituary. She attended Jackson Elementary School, where she was a known truth teller, and she'll always be remembered for her ability to uplift people. It says that she could bring a smile to anyone's face. She was a young girl full of life, creativity, wisdom, ambition, and independence. She enjoyed all things that a child her age would love. She enjoyed playing basketball, fishing, coloring, watching TikToks. She was just your average 10-year-old girl. But on July 10th, 2020, in Davenport, Iowa, a 911 call comes in from her mom, Aisha. She was hysterical trying to tell the dispatch that her 10-year-old daughter, Breasia, was missing. Aisha goes on to tell dispatch that Breasia had spent the night with her younger half-brother, 8-year-old DL, and his dad, named Henry Dinkins, the night before. She says that she received a call from Henry while she was at work saying that Breasia wasn't there. She drops everything and immediately leaves work and heads to the apartment where her kids had been spending the night. You see, Breasia and DL told their mom that they wanted to spend the night with Henry, but Henry didn't have his own place. He was kind of drifting between spots. Now, he did have himself a motorhome and he had a little car, a maroon Impala, but he didn't really have a place to call his own. So for the time being, he was staying with his girlfriend or lady friend, Andrea Culberson. Now, Andrea lived in a little one-bedroom apartment, and although it wasn't much, she was more than happy to let Henry and the kids stay there from time to time. And just a little sidebar, Henry isn't Breasia's biological dad. Although he had been in her life since she was a baby, he's only DL's dad, but he still claimed her as his own. So the day before all of this happened, on July 9th, 2020, Henry picks up Breasia and DL. He takes them back to Andrea's house, and according to him, the kids play, eat dinner, then go to bed. He says that when he wakes up the next morning, he leaves the house for a few hours, then he comes back and notices that Breasia was gone. When he noticed she was missing, he immediately began searching for her, and then he called Aisha to let her know. And then that's how Aisha ended up calling the police. So at this point, the police meet Henry and Aisha at the apartment complex, and they try to gather as much information as they can from Henry and Aisha. But as you can imagine, Aisha is flustered. She doesn't know what's going on. She just got a call saying that her daughter is missing. And this is the worst possible news that you can get. So she's literally still in her work uniform. She pulls up at the apartment complex and she wants answers from Henry. And at this time, Aisha and Henry can be seen on the police body cam footage arguing about what happened to Breasia. Here, take a listen.
Have we called family?
I've called everybody.
We've been everywhere. We've been everywhere.
First of all, she would have never woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she would have never.
What you mean? 8 o'clock in the
I'm
morning.
just saying.
That ain't what I
She
said. I
definitely
never
was- I
said.
know you
Guys,
didn't say that.
this isn't the time to fight.
Exactly. I don't give a about you walking. You lost her though.
How did I lose?
Because you was watching her, Henry. What the do you mean?
But hey,
I'm going, sir. Come on, D.
listen to me.
I'm going.
Mamas know their kids. So Aisha knew that Breasia was about to just get up and walk away. Like, this was her first time being at this apartment complex. She didn't know the area. She didn't know where she was. So how could she know where she was going, for one? And secondly, she was vision and hearing impaired. And she was scared of the dark. So she wasn't just going to wander off anywhere alone. So with that, Aisha wasn't buying Henry's story. And he was really sitting there trying to paint the picture that Breasia wandered off on her own, without letting him, Andrea, or her brother know where she was going. And while the cop was trying to be compassionate and as understanding as he could be in this situation, Aisha was done talking. She storms off with DL, gets in the car, and leaves. After she leaves, Henry is still there talking to the cop, trying to be the victim, talking about how it's unfair that Aisha is blaming him for Breasia's disappearance. And the cop is trying to keep Henry as calm as possible so that he can get some more information in order to conduct a thorough search to find Breasia. So the first thing the officer does is he goes to the apartment so that he can talk to Henry's lady friend, Andrea. She lets the police come in and search her home, look around, and she explains that the apartment stays locked at night. So she has no idea how Breasia could have gotten out or how somebody could have gotten in. And after looking around, it's clear to police that there's no signs of a break-in. So they leave her apartment and canvass the apartment complex, but there's no one who is able to recall seeing Breasia anywhere. And after talking to any and everybody in the apartment complex, police want to circle back and touch bases with Henry, being that he was the last person to see Breasia. But when they try to bring him into the station for questioning, he's nowhere to be found. He's not answering any of their phone calls. He's just up and disappeared. Finally, after several hours, Henry shows up at the police station. And when asked about where he was and why he wasn't answering the phone, he says that he left because he was just so upset that Aisha was blaming him for Breasia's disappearance, and he just needed to cool off. Now, although this is a little bit suspicious, police are glad that he voluntarily came in to talk to them. So they waste no time asking him more detailed questions about the last hours before Breasia disappeared. So Henry starts with the day before. He says he picked the kids up, they played games, brushed their teeth, took their showers, and went to bed. He states he left the house, and when he came back, he notices that Bree wasn't there. So he immediately started looking everywhere for her. He tells police that he didn't wake Andrea up at this time, and he decided to go look for her on his own. But he couldn't find her. So when he gets back to the apartment, at this time, Andrea is up, and she's asking him what's wrong. He goes on to say that he didn't tell Andrea and he didn't call Aisha because he didn't really think that Bree was missing at this time. So he leaves the apartment again to go look for her. And when he couldn't find her this time, this is when he finally decides to tell Andrea and to call Aisha. Now, when police are questioning him, they do learn that he has a criminal record. He was convicted of a third-degree sexual assault on a 5-year-old girl in 1990 when he was only 17 years old. Now, it is noted that he failed to register as a sex offender. And at this point in time, he is 51 years old. So that's a pretty big age gap between 17 and 51. But red flags are definitely still going up for the investigators. And on top of that, his story really isn't adding up. So they're trying to read him and figure out if he's the type of guy that could cause harm to a child, his child. So while trying to corroborate his story, they ask him if they could search his phone. And this is when the conversation becomes tense and Henry starts getting hostile. His entire demeanor changes and he instantly gets defensive. He tells police that it's okay if they go through his phone, but he refused to give them his password, and he would only unlock it if they weren't watching him. And he damn sure wasn't letting them download any data off of his phone. It's like at this time he wanted to be in complete control. But when they pushed back against his demands, explaining that they want his password to ensure that he wasn't deleting anything, he completely shuts down. He's like, all right, well, I'm not giving you my password and you can't look at me while I put in my password, and I'm not letting you download any data, so you can't look through my phone anymore. So now it's like, you were the last person to see Breasia alive. She was in your care when she disappeared, and now you're not trying to let us go through your phone? Oh, okay, no, you're not a suspect at all. And although this doesn't immediately make him guilty, he still voluntarily continues on with the interview, and he doesn't ask for an attorney. So they go ahead and keep digging, and they ask Henry where his car is. Very simple question. But oh no, not for Henry. This was another booty-clenching question for him. So he's very vague and he dances around the question. He's like, "It's not here, but I can get it to you." But police weren't about to hold their breath when it came to this car, so they started searching on their own. And they find his car parked blocks away from the police station, which they find pretty odd considering that there was a bunch of open parking spaces right in front of the station. Now, if this isn't sketchy and red flags aren't standing at attention right now, I don't know what is. You don't want us to go through your phone. Now, you parked blocks away from the station and you don't want us to know where your car is. Come on now, Henry, we weren't born yesterday. And although his story is flopping in the wind right now, they don't have any solid evidence to hold him there. So they let him go and they continue to look for Breasia. Now, being that they had to let Henry go, they wanted to bring in Breasia's 8-year-old brother DL to see if he can shed some light on his sister's disappearance. So DL goes on to tell police that after Henry picked he and his sister up, he stopped at the store to get some cigarettes and then took them back to his girlfriend's house. He recalls playing games in the living room with Andrea while Henry and Breasia were in the bedroom playing. And when DL tells the investigators this, they can tell that this frustrated him because he says he wanted to be the one playing with his dad, not Breasia. But after they all played, they ate dinner and then they went to bed, just like Henry said. DL goes on to tell police that when he wakes up the next morning, his sister was gone. And then he says his dad takes him fishing. Fishing? Now, he does remember his dad telling him they were going to go fishing, but he doesn't actually remember seeing any fishing poles or actually fishing. However, he does remember seeing a bottle of bleach and a knife, and he recalls seeing this knife when his dad opened the trunk and cleaned it outside of the car. And there was something very critical that DL was able to recall. He remembers his dad's car getting stuck in the mud, and some men had to help pull them out. Now, detectives knew that this information supported their belief that Henry likely had something to do with the disappearance of Breasia. So they asked DL if he remembers the exact location of where he and his dad went fishing. I mean, this is a long shot, but kids see and notice a lot more than we give them credit for. So they took their shot. So with this, they put DL in the car and they start driving, trying to, hopefully jog his memory. And to their surprise, what he could remember was that they were in a wooded area with water around it. So detectives don't know where they're going, but they start driving around, going towards a wooded area, using a route that Henry could have possibly taken. And during this, DL was actually able to recall places that he and his dad passed that morning. He's like, "Oh yeah, we passed that store over there. Oh, and we passed that restaurant right there." And he even remembered some turns that his dad took. So my man was super helpful, okay? Now, unfortunately, they didn't find an exact location, but this new information did give investigators enough evidence to get a search warrant for Henry's vehicles. And in his mobile home, they find a bottle of bleach and a machete, which corroborates DL's version of events. And as police are feeling like they're starting to get closer to finding Breasia, Aisha is going through it. Her baby girl is missing and there's no signs of where she could be. The community rallied behind her and her family, but she was hurt.
Everybody is working on it, okay? It doesn't end, okay?
I know, but it's 9:31 and I haven't heard from her. Not okay. I can't go to sleep with that. Like, what the It's 9:30 and she's nowhere.
We're not stopping looking for your baby, okay?
I can't go to sleep without knowing she's okay. I have not heard from her. I would do anything. Why my baby? Why?
Wow. Every time I listen to that, my eyes get watery because you can hear her pain. Thousands of posters of Breasia's face were plastered all over the Davenport community, and people of all ages and backgrounds came together to show their support in search for Breasia. But after 2 weeks, there were still no signs of her. But police were hot on the trail and they refused to let up. So with that, they decided to bring DL back in to see if he could recall anything else from that night. This time when DL comes in, it's clear that he doesn't want to talk. In fact, he seemed pretty agitated when police asked him certain questions. When he was asked whether or not he was told not to tell the police certain information, he admitted that his dad told him if he told them anything about the mobile home, he was going to tear him up. But DL just wants to find his sister, so he does his best to help out in the investigation. So he goes on to tell them he woke up in the middle of the night and saw his dad and Bree walking down the stairs of the apartment. And then he says when his dad came back, Bree wasn't with him, and that's when he took him fishing. Armed with this new information, police continue to look closer into Henry, and they begin to build a timeline using his cell phone data and using surveillance footage from stores he visited and from street cameras. And they find out a lot of information with this. They see that at 3:30 a.m. on July 10th, Henry is seen on camera at the gas station. He pulls up and parks at the furthest pump away from the store, and he walks into the gas station. And while he's at the counter purchasing his stuff, you can see him clear as day, constantly checking out the window looking at his car. When he leaves the store, he arrives back at the apartment right around sunrise at around 5:30 a.m. He then gets DL and leaves again. Next, he's seen on footage at a Clinton Walmart buying bleach. And it just so happened that when he was at this Walmart, it was during the time frame when he was supposedly out looking everywhere for Bree. So boom, they've now caught him in a huge lie. So with this, they're very confident that he's responsible for Breasia's disappearance. However, they don't go in guns blazing and immediately arrest him. They of course continue digging in hopes of finding more evidence to use against him. Although investigators are very confident that Henry is their guy, they still had no body. But 8 months later, the Davenport police were contacted by the Clinton County Police. They were notified that a skull had been found. You see, Breasia disappeared in July. Summer came and went, fall came and went, and then winter came and went. And it's now March of 2021. The snow's melted, and what was once hidden is now visible. And it's at this time when a couple of fishermen notice a skull and call police. Days later, a press conference was held. And it's at this time when the Davenport police reveal the remains are in fact those of 10-year-old Breasia Terrell. And this hit the community hard. Even as the detective is making this announcement, he breaks down in tears. But it's the autopsy that really tells the story. Her autopsy reveals that she was shot in the face. She was shot in the lower part of her jaw, and one bullet traveled down her spine, and another bullet traveled down her shoulder. After the press conference announcement, the Davenport police receive a call. And this call comes from a man explaining that he has some very helpful information. After hearing the details of where Breasia's remains were found, this witness comes forward revealing that 8 months prior to this, he actually helped a man in the early mornings of July in that area. Now, he doesn't remember the exact day, but he does remember it was around 4:30 a.m. He says a black man jumped out in front of his car, waving him down, asking him for help because his car was stuck in a ditch. He says this man gets in his car and he directs him to drive about a half mile up the road to where his car was. He says the man told him he ended up in a ditch because he took a wrong turn. He goes on to tell police that it was a maroon/red Impala. The trunk was facing them and it was skewed just a little bit off the edge of a ditch. And this is a very critical piece of information because when they searched Henry's car, they found chunks of mud stuck in the undercarriage of his car. And they were later identified to be the same soil samples from the area where Breasia's body was found. So with this, police have enough evidence to arrest and charge Henry with first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. And although he was arrested, there was still no answers as to why he took her life. But the only logical and reasonable thing investigators could come up with is that being that he already has a history of sexually abusing children, they believe Henry sexually assaulted Breasia, and in order to keep this secret from getting out, he killed her. And they also believe that Breasia was in his car that morning when he went to the gas station at 3 a.m. He then dumped her body where his car got stuck, drove home, got his son, and tried to play it off like he was looking for Breasia. But when it was all said and done, Henry wasn't charged with sexually assaulting Breasia because her body was so badly decomposed, there was no evidence left behind to support sexual abuse. Henry's case went to trial in August of 2023. However, he shocked the prosecution when he waived his right to a jury trial. Now, this is a bit unusual, being that a defendant does have a right to a trial by jury, or a bench trial if you so choose. Now, a bench trial is where the judge has a final decision in everything. He's the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And typically in criminal cases like this, the defendant will opt in for a jury trial. And most of the time, people want to have a jury of their peers because if you have good attorneys, they're going to be the ones to ensure that the people in that jury box are going to be sympathetic to your case, which is why in a lot of court cases, we typically see trials with juries. But in this situation, Henry felt like the moment a jury of his peers heard that he was a sex offender, he was automatically going to be guilty. So he went ahead and took his chances because he felt like a judge would be less emotionally driven in order to decide his innocence or guilt. And with that, he elected for a bench trial. And also, he didn't have money for an attorney, so one was appointed to him. Now, in this particular case, his court-appointed attorney was pretty knowledgeable about his previous conviction of molesting a 5-year-old child. And even though it did happen years ago when he was 17 years old, the media didn't care nothing about that. And this just happened last year in 2023, so the media was all over this case. It was airing on court TV. It was quite literally a trial by media. And his defense attorney understood that he was already guilty in the eyes of the public. So with that, the trial begins. And the prosecution starts out by laying out a very visual timeline of events.
It was a normal evening. When Miss Culberson went to sleep, she knew Mr. Deakins was there in the living room on the couch. At 3 a.m. in the morning, she woke up. Mr. Deakins wasn't there and Breasia wasn't there. Now at 3:30 a.m., she heard Mr. Deakins very quietly come up into the apartment. He collects something from the closet and then he leaves. Somewhere around 5:45, Mr. Deakins returns to the apartment. Where's Breasia? There's no Breasia.
And then they call their first witness to the stand. And lo and behold, it's Henry's ex-girlfriend, Andrea. And while on the stand, she testifies that when she woke up at 3 a.m., she noticed that Breasia wasn't there. So her first instinct is to call Henry, but it rings a couple of times and then goes to voicemail. When he gets back to her apartment, it's around 5:45. And she says at this time, he's wearing a completely different outfit from the one he had left in. And when questioned about where he's been, he just brushes her off and says he'll be back. He then leaves again, and she says that when he comes back, of course, Breasia wasn't with him. After wrapping up with Andrea, the prosecution calls their star witness to the stand, DL, who is now 11 years old. Now, when he takes the stand, he testifies to everything that he had previously already shared with police during the early stages of the investigation. But when the defense cross-examines him, his testimony starts to fall apart a little bit. So, for the very first time, he says that he was actually there when his dad shot his sister in the face. And this news shocked everybody. You can literally hear a gasp in the courtroom. And when cross-examined by the defense, DL definitely admits that he was angry with his dad and that he would say whatever he needed to say to ensure that his dad was held accountable. Now, being that he is still a child, the defense didn't want to dig into him too hard, but his story changed and it showed that he was a little bit discreditable. And he basically admitted that he was willing to say whatever he needed to say in order to get a conviction for his dad. And although we do believe DL, it was kind of hard to trust his version of events while he was on the stand. But every witness the prosecution brought forth, the defense cross-examined. But with every cross-examination, the defense brought up the fact that there was no blood, no semen in Henry's car, his motorhome, or on any of his clothing that was collected. And the defense really honed in on this in every argument because in all the alleged multiple crime scenes, Like I said, they didn't find any blood or semen, and they also didn't find any bleach evidence that they claim Henry used to clean up the crime scene. But the prosecution snapped back at this argument, stating that after several months of being in the snow and sitting in the elements for 8 months, of course it'll be pretty unusual or even difficult to find any bleach or blood evidence left behind. But after all witnesses were called, Henry's potbelly ass decides not to testify on his own behalf. So both sides rested, and the defense rested comfortably, standing on the fact that the prosecution didn't prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. But now the case is in the judge's hands, and he takes a solid 2 weeks to come back with the verdict. And on September 15th, the judge rains down a guilty verdict on all counts of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. And a month later, on October 11th, Henry's round, beach ball belly, nappy-headed ass was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge goes on to state that Henry has no conscience or remorse for his actions, but at this time he was allowed to make a statement on his behalf. And this man takes this opportunity to read this long 20-minute essay about how his entire case was a gross mishandling of justice and that he was profiled based on his previous conviction. Shut the hell up. Aisha closes out this sentencing by expressing that there's no closure or justice in this case.
Closure doesn't exist here in this case. Justice doesn't exist here in this case. You didn't just take away my baby's life, you took away everything from me. My family's sense of security, lives, health, and potential. You took my baby girl from me and just gunned her down like she was nothing and left her and never said a word at all.
This case is just sad and senseless. Another innocent life was taken too soon, and for what? Well, cousins, that's the end of this week's case. I didn't have a super long one for y'all this week, but I hope you enjoyed it. And make sure y'all are sharing with y'all friends and family all the juicy cases that y'all hear about here on Guns and Butter. And make sure you're following me on whatever platform you get your podcast on. But as usual, I'll see y'all back here same place, same time next week.